Alrighty, I think we are good. Let's move this over here. Cool. So the jam is over. And I took this week to update the game to Bevy 0.19. Bevy 0.19 is unreleased. It is basically the code on main. So the issue with that is that obviously everything that I used is not updated for 0.19. So if we scroll down a little bit, you can see that my patch list is growing quite a bit. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 forked crates at the moment, if you don't include using Bevy main, which is technically not forked. For some various updates for 0.19, which is a lot. A couple of these are mine, so it doesn't really matter all that much. Shader utils and blockout are my own crates. These are navigation mesh and like recast Polyanya, both underpin Blue Navigator. BVH2D is deep in that tree. Geo actually probably should be down here as well. I'm trying to keep things that are relatively together, like together in the cargo toml and whatnot. Firewheel, IRChem, HRTF. This is a dependency of Bevy seedling. This is a dependency of Firewheel. So this is like Bevy seedlings category. This is like the nav mesh category. Oop. Can't mess up my dependency names. But TLDR, like a lot of this is forks of various crates for different reasons. Hey, Courier, how's it going? I don't really intend to ship this to Wasm again moving forward. So I'm not too concerned about that. We were able to update Rand, so I think, see how many get randoms are in here. We're down to 2 get randoms, so a 0.3.4 version, which is, looks like caused by Blue Navigator, so I could probably update that and get rid of that. Rand 0.9.2, where is Rand 0.9.2 coming from? That is also Blue Navigator. So I have a fork of Blue Navigator. We could get rid of this extra Rand dependency. And this project could be entirely on 0.4.2, I'd say. But like I said, I don't really plan on shipping this to web in the near term. Again, anyway. We shipped to web for the jam. One thing that I probably should do is, right now the game doesn't I'll say it doesn't behave well if the window gets too small, because the scale is kind of static. So one thing that we probably should do is pick a scaling mode instead, which I didn't do for the jam. Why are there no code actions available? Bring scaling mode in from Bevy camera. And which one do I really want? I got auto max, auto min, window size as the default, fixed is not what I want. Fixed vertical might be. Trying to think of window behaviors, basically. Let's do fixed vertical. And let's say this is 1080 for the moment. And we'll just run that to see the difference. Every once in a while, I like get a spike of panic in the back of my head where I'm like, oh, did I even like start the right scene for the stream? So now if the scene gets bigger, it kind of scales. If the scene gets smaller, it kind of scales, but only vertically. Horizontally, it doesn't really change much. Which is mostly okay. I guess if people play it on like a vertical display, they would get a very tall like output. So we could do something like auto min instead. I think fixed vertical is mostly fine. The interesting part about that is that now we feel kind of zoomed out. I don't have Bevy Inspector eGUI in here anymore because I decided to not fork that and update it. So it is very much like we're living on main, first of all, which means that we don't like the docs on 0.18 don't really work for us in certain cases. Luckily, there are dev docs, which are not really meant for you to use regularly, but if you are doing things with main, helps a lot. I think if I use this setup, I'm going to want to increase the zoom of the camera at least a little bit. One of the other things that I was thinking about is the camera really should be moving with the player at some point. It's really unfortunate that these orthographic scale numbers are so small. My Rush character that I did in like 2 or 3 hours is really bad. So I'm kind of opting into a level of like compile ergonomics by forking all these crates and working off 0.19. This is not like working off 0.19 is not something I would suggest that most people do. I think the first thing I want to do is make it so that wherever you put the mouse is where the attack goes. It feels like the biggest thing to start with. How's everybody else's day going so far? Mine just started, so I've been around for a short period of time. See, 1920, 1080. I feel like it's a little weird with the scale and the scaling mode. But at least now when it's on stream and like shoved into a little corner, it's a little bit more visible. I also way bumped up the, so there was an issue with Bevy enhanced input in the demos. The examples didn't have delta scale. They only had smooth nudge. So everything was moving way too fast. Remove this comment now, because basically delta scale is required here. And then the other thing is after the hammer, we don't go back to playing the idle animation. There's a lot of bugs, but just things that I am noticing at the moment. See, hammer smack plays an animation at some point. I think that is in lib. There was also a bunch of like code that I wrote that I just dumped into random places like in the last 24 hours of the jam. So some of that has to get unwound. So we're doing this in the animation extension, in lib, and in controls. I think controls. So this plays that animation, and then we have an event at the end, hammer slam finished, which technically speaking, if nothing else has happened, and hammer slam is like still the thing that's playing, then hammer slam finished should reset the animation. This is one of the things that I'm interested to see if we'll kind of buckle with the observer-based approach. Let's see, hammer slam finished, hammer slam hit. These should really be, I guess, in the hammer slam module. Right, so there's our material, there's update smack. I guess this should be here. Animation event should come in. GLTF assets is just kind of like my big GLTF bucket of stuff. This got put in here. What else is wrong in lib? I need to move these over too. This one's interesting though, because this one is like gameplay logic. And realistically, what's going to happen here is that when you click, you're probably just going to do like generic attack and not hammer slam specifically. So this will probably turn into either a dispatch observer in the controls. So what do I have on my clipboard right now? I have this. Let's pull this over here because why not? Pull in app state. Like I don't know that like app state references belong in here, for example. On exit asset loading is not really like a thing that we should be doing here, but it is a thing that we kind of have to do here for the moment. And I guess having all of the hammer slam stuff in the same file is also useful, so I will move it. And then we can always refactor a bit later. But I do feel like these things should be a little bit more independent than they are currently. FracPy 2, F32. Get rid of commands there because we're not using it, I think. And then in lib, got these two observers for the hammer slam stuff. We'll stick those in our plugin over here. Hammer slam. These don't need to come in anymore except for the plugin. Get rid of some of this stuff. Animation event, some of the constants. Start cleaning up some of the warnings. One of the things that I regretted not doing first when I upgraded to 0.19 is getting rid of all the warnings before I actually did the upgrade. Is there any Hammer stuff left in here? I don't think so. Just the plugin setup. And I think we moved everything over to here. So I think all of that's good. Bevy 0.19 already. It's not out, just to be clear. I don't know if you're like thinking that it got released. It did not get released. As you can see from my cargo toml, perhaps. I am interested in a couple of things, I think. One is that I want to get ahead of a couple things that I know are landing on 0.19 this cycle. Render systems or render graph as systems, or whatever you want to call it, the like render graph removal is one of them. So I want to make sure that the code that I'm writing right now serves the educational content that I make. Which means getting more familiar with the render graph as systems if I'm doing any graphic stuff. BSN, who knows if it'll land for 0.19. If it does, I want to use it here. So anything that lands on main, I think is a good thing, good candidate for me to start using with this project since it was just written. I don't think Weasel is going to land for 0.19. That's just my personal estimation. There's no commitments or anything. But I just don't see it landing just yet. It's still possible. There's still time, but there's a couple things that need to happen, and they're like dependent on each other. So my guess is that doesn't get pushed through. My guess is that happens later. Render graph as systems. Did you miss something? Yes. If you didn't see render graph as systems, then you did miss something. I did it on stream a couple weeks ago. Wow, that was a terrible search. Render graph systems. Closed PRs. So render graph as systems. The render graph has been replaced. So if you've ever written like an impl, I'm already forgetting what they're called. View query? No, impl node or impl. I can't remember what the other one is. View node, I think the other one was called. To do like custom pipeline stuff. That is what changed. If you go to main on Bevy and you look at the examples, Shader Advanced is probably going to show this the most. From a end user perspective, if you're not writing like graphics code, then this probably doesn't affect you all that much. But I wrote the compute mesh one, so I'm familiar with it. The current version of this uses the ECS schedules. So to init the pipeline, you do that in render startup. To prepare data, you can do that here. To handle where the compute mesh shader is running relative to the camera, you use like before, after, .chain, etc. And render graph as a like name or a label is now a schedule and not a like separate concept. So it's really nice overall. I think it's a good change. The impact of it is going to only be seen by people who are writing like view node implementations right now or node implementations. Right? Like view node is I guess this doesn't have any links to any examples. I was hoping to be able to not have to. I guess there's impls for the other things. Let's go to one of the impls. Let's go to which one is going to be the best. OIT, tone mapping, upscaling. Let's try post-processing. So before, to write these nodes in the render graph, you had to implement either node or view node for some type that you wrote. This post-process node is defined somewhere in this file. But this file is fairly large. There it is. So default for post-processing node is just kind of like a label that holds the trade implementation, but it could hold more data. And you define your view query with a bunch of like kind of specialish kind of stuff. And then that gets used when the graph is like, hey, you should run now. You get all that stuff, including the view query here. So it was a little bit awkward in some respects where like you had to define the view query as an associated type, and then you would get that in the run function through like this generics implementation, which was kind of like very different from the way that systems work, right? Well, not very, very different. Like it's still query stuff and get it, but like not as familiar as it could be. Okay, yeah, that's huge then. Oh, thanks, Casey. I appreciate you. Sorry you can't stick around, but I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay, yeah, that's huge then. I was only recently learning the graphic side of things, and doing post-process shaders involved having to add your own node for it. Yes, that's the node. I don't know if you would write a view node for that. I think you didn't have to write a view node for that. I think you had to write a node for that in the past. Just thinking offhand. I'm the last person to have touched that file, so hopefully I'm correct. You go to this point. No, it is a view node. You're very welcome. Thank you. Wrote a water shader this week that interacts with Avian, having a blast. Sweet. That's awesome. I hope you shared that in the showcase channel or something. People really like water shaders and stuff like that. If you are in Discord, I know not everybody is these days, especially these days. But if you are, share that in the showcase channel or post it somewhere. People really like seeing that stuff. Just checked my code and it was a view node. You might have been doing it wrong. No, yeah, you probably just copied whatever was here, because this is like a 400 line file. And like most of this is kind of scaffoldy. It's why I don't mind like pointing people to this example, because it is a lot of code in the Bevy Discord. Yeah, in the Bevy Showcase channel Discord. Which you can find on bevy.org if you are not in that Discord. I don't mind pointing people to the custom post-processing example, because while it is verbose, it is not terribly like intense in the way that a lot of other graphic stuff is intense. Right. I know we're looking at this one right now. Do I have the other link? Let's just go back to the regular version of it, or the main version of it. So you go through this and it's like, okay, there's a couple of systems and stuff. Yeah, you use that as base. It does feel very involved for something that in, say, Unreal would just be a shader blueprint. Yes. So the full screen material is partially meant to be the high level API that is more like that. The full screen material doesn't have like its end implementation yet, right? This is basically post-processing, more or less. There's another example in the Bevy repo too, with the full screen material in the same directory that we're already taking a look at. Full screen. Yeah, so like this is 68 lines. So close. Well, we need one more comment. So you get the full screen material with your full screen effect. You get your typical setup code for like, hey, spawn some cube in so we can see something. And then you throw the full screen effect here, which you'll remember from like the post-process implementation that you worked with, right? That's just a struct component, extract component, makes it bring into the render world, etc. And then it's just like, here's a full screen material, define your fragment shader. Yeah, I tried to use that material originally, but because it doesn't have bind support yet. Yeah, it doesn't have as bind group specifically. So you can put data in, right? You can get this data as a uniform, but you can't get additional textures. If you look at the actual code for the shader, just somewhere around here, you can see that you do get the screen texture, but that is like a built-in feature of this higher level API. And you can see that you get the intensity here. So you can get anything that you would pass in as a uniform. You just can't get additional textures and samplers. So I think it's still useful at the moment, just not as useful as it will be in the future. But the custom post-processing example, while it looks intense from just a length of file, wow, this got brought down from 400 to 300 with the render graph stuff. That's wild. I didn't realize that. Just looking through this now, because it's even simpler than it used to be. So you've got your components, which are those components that we just looked at for like the full screen material, right? You've got these post-process settings, extract component plugin, uniform component plugin. This is extract component plugin is how you get it from the main world to the render world. Uniform component plugin is like, how do you send it to a shader? Then you set up your initialization and running of the two things. So the pipeline for the post-process, as well as the actual execution of the post-process pipeline. This is the new render graph as system stuff right here. Post-process bind group cache, post-process system. We could actually set this up. I have use cases that I would want to use a post-process for. So maybe we just do that right now instead of just like running through this. Trying to think, I think I want to do the full thing. The full screen material is cool, but I think for my own use cases, this is probably going to turn from a post-process module into a prelude star. This is probably going to turn from a post-process module into something that is like multiple post-processes. So I'm just going to dump all this stuff in. This is going to have a couple of systems that we're going to probably get rid of, as well as a couple of, yeah, so like rotates, we probably don't really need. This spawning of this mesh, we don't really need. Directional light I'm going to get rid of because I already have the atmosphere. This setup will hook into one of our state transitions. And then from here up is actually the post-process stuff. And I think it's going to yoink the code in here. It is generally encouraged to set up post-processing effects as a plugin. Cool. It's going to yoink all that, basically. think the rotate, update settings. We don't have the WGSL file yet. Let's plonk this in here because that's where I wanted it. We're going to plonk these up here because we need some of that stuff. And then this, what else are we missing here? We're going to have default plugins in our actual app. Post-process plugin is this plugin. Startup is our setup. So I think these two we can pull in. Put these here. We are going to need, I don't like putting the shader paths up here. I know that the examples do this constantly. But that is like literally never where I, as a like user, am looking for this. And my WGSL files, or like my shader files, are always .wgsl. So if there is a shader file in this file, then I can find it by doing .wgsl, and I can go directly to it. It doesn't need to be at the top of the file for me. So we're going to need to do shaders post-processing. That is going to be, we're going to start off with whatever the shader is here that they have implemented. I think one of the things that I want to do, or one of the things that I want to use post-processing for, is screen transitions. So going from one level to another, I kind of want to do a wipe and then wipe out. Oh my God, is this the, I guess that's still Chris, right? CRIS. Chris is spelt so many different ways. It's surprising. Text box is behind a Lego spaceship you can't see. The text box is behind a Lego spaceship. Oh, you have a Lego spaceship on your desk that is in front of your monitor. That's hilarious. What am I doing here? We need to create this WGSL file. So this is just going to be post-processing.wgsl. We're going to drop this in. We, so far, have not done anything interesting here. So I'm just going to leave this as it is. We do need to add our post-processing plugin now here. Post-process plugin, I think, is what I named it. That throws us into, hey, you have a lot of plugins here, don't you? I think there's not a lot of like grouping to be had here. So you've got control, states, atmosphere, awareness. I'm not really using awareness right now, so I could get rid of it. Actually, does everybody know what just happened there? Because I did not explain that at all. Basically, what's happening here is that because Rust doesn't have, I'm just going to generalize and say like variadics. Because Rust doesn't have arbitrary implementations of traits of any size, you have to implement traits for specific sizes of tuples. So if you want it to be implemented for tuples of up to 3 or something like that, arity is a term. Arity is the term for the specific number. I guess you could say tuples of specific arity, but at that point, like tuples of specific length, if I'm talking to people that don't know, you know. Actually, I do have a question here about why this is an issue, because it just ran just fine. Why did this run if it's throwing an error for Rust Analyzer? Is Rust Analyzer viewing this differently? Oh, you know what the issue is? I know what the issue is. because Rust Analyzer is Rust Analyzer has all features enabled in my editor. So this configurable debug camera is being enabled by my editor, but not by my current configuration of the actual code that I'm running. That's why it shows up in my editor, not when I'm running it. So far, we haven't done anything interesting here. Story of my life. That's too mean to yourself. But yeah, no, this is absolutely something that needs to be solved eventually. Yeah. So basically, like, if I were to not hide this behind a feature, which I'm not going to do at the moment, this would break. I think I could. Is there another plugin I can just add? Can't think of one off the top of my head. But basically, this is like, oh, it can only be implemented for tuples of size 12, let's say. So once you hit 13 in that tuple, then the trait implementation kind of like breaks down. The nice part is that you can just recursively nest them. It's kind of like a little speed bump. It's not great. Nobody likes it. People want this fixed. People are working on fixing it. But that's what's happening there. In our post process, we are spawning a camera, which we need to not be spawning. I'm going to put this post process on the core camera. So our post process settings, which we didn't make public. We really didn't make those public. We did not make those public. So post process settings with the default, import this, run this. We don't have access to this little padding thing. I don't think I'm ever going to run this on WebGL. Going to be honest, I have no interest in running this on WebGL. I can't think of many. I have, for the duration of working on this particular project, left a bunch of this padding in just in case. Sorry if anybody had an issue with that. Didn't expect that to happen. That was interesting. We should be debugging what happened there. So unfortunately, that is probably going to happen again if you had an issue with the flashing that just occurred. There's a proposal to let you implement on a tuple with syntax like trait ... but can't remember if that's going somewhere. It's not graphics programming if you don't flashbang yourself at least once. It's like drawing first blood on a PC build. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know exactly what happened there. We're gonna look through these errors and figure out hopefully what just happened. Oh, I know exactly what happened, actually. I'm reading this and I know exactly what happened. The error here, first of all, is a validation error from like WGPU or Bevy render, like something in the graphics stack. In our command encoder, which is a graphics thing, in set pipeline, which is a Bevy/WGPU thing, the render pipeline that we're using for our post process, the targets, which are the things that we're rendering to, like the color target, so like the screen, right? Or the image that we're rendering to, is incompatible with the render pass. Now, you may not know why it's incompatible with the render pass, but if we keep reading, we can say the incompatible color attachments, which are the things that we're passing into this post process and the things that we're passing in as arguments. Remember that we are passing in basically like the output of everything else that's rendering and some extra data. So it says that the render pass uses textures with formats RGBA16 float, which I happen to know in the back of my head is HDR. But the render pipeline with post-process pipeline, so this is why you put labels on things so that you can see them in error messages. Because this post-process pipeline is literally this label that we can see on screen right now on the right. That's what this is. Post-process pipeline. We have literally written the label in. That's why we know what this is. And it's saying that this pipeline that we're queuing here uses an attachment with RGBA 8 unorm sRGB, which is SDR, effectively. What's hilarious is that this is a thing that I know because this comment right here is a comment that I wrote. So it is nice. I guess we don't have... Do we not have a default for HDR? That's kind of unfortunate. Anyway, I'm going to run this again, so it might flash, just as a warning. But it won't. Is it creating a little bit of weirdness? Yes. But that is directly related to the effect that the post-processing is applying. It's not related to anything going wrong, per se. So this is like a chromatic aberration where the intensity is increasing over time. And now we have our post-process pass on this whole thing. The post-process for the material that is inside of the exit condition is really interesting because that is going up and down based on some noise. And I think that this is multiplying the intensity of that in a way that makes it a little bit flickery, which is just an interesting side effect here. HDR default for the texture format going on the PR list. Well, I don't know that it's required. Because we do have view target texture format HDR. Right? So I do think it would be interesting. Because this is just a constant that's over here. I do feel like these should be at some point in the same place-ish. And they are not currently. So that's probably, you're probably right. This probably does deserve some kind of PR. Cool. I'm fine with leaving this as the label. We're now using this WGSL. I think we have File Watcher enabled by default. So if we go to this shader, now we will be able to do anything we want to here. In this case, I don't think there's anything I really want to do at the moment. I don't think I want a full screen chromatic aberration effect in general. And before I start writing, I think before I start writing post-process effects, the thing that I want to do is get some of the Bevy UI code in here. Because I know that if I run post-process on all of the output, there is the potential to like interact with the UI as well. And I really don't, generally speaking, want to do that. I think that in general, what I'm going to end up with here is one camera for the UI and one camera for the gameplay. Anything I'm looking forward to in 0.19? Render graph as systems, which has already landed. I don't want to like look forward to anything that hasn't landed. But render graph as systems is great. There is, you know what there is actually? Let's get rid of this and let's do, am I going to remember where this is? Let me, Gaussian in WGSL. And let's get rid of this. And let's bring in import Bevy post-process Gaussian blur. And then I think this returns a vec4. Let me check. Texture sampler, coord, COC offset. And the return value is a vec4. So I think we can do that. BSN, yeah, I don't know when BSN is going to land. I don't want to speak about, like, I don't want to say I'm excited for BSN or anything like that because it hasn't landed. There is a new PR that's about to go up, which is very exciting. So there's progress towards getting it landed, but I really don't have any idea when it's actually going to land. And I don't want to be like, oh, be excited for BSN in some random version, you know? With render graphics systems, does it simplify filling in non-standard bind data at all? Like what you ran into trying to use full screen as you were doing an alternative lighting shader? You were doing lighting as a post-process effect? I guess you're doing a 2D game then, in that sense? I will say yes, it makes it easier to pull in resources. If you look at the way the pipeline works now, this is just a system. So if you need to access a resource, if you want to access some data that the render world has somewhere, and you want to throw that into your pipeline, now it's as simple as, yeah, just go grab the resource. Yeah, just go grab the resource. Yeah, just go grab the resource. I don't want to say that lighting is particularly easy to figure out how to access and then use. But I will say that accessing things in the way that you expect to be able to access them has gotten easier, right? Because now these are just systems. What about Weasel? Wasn't it supposed to appear in 0.19? Weasel has never had a version target associated with it. There are two things that need to be done for Weasel. One is the spec needs to agree on an import glob syntax proposal, which is like, if I did star here, that's what that is. So Weasel as a spec process needs to commit to like a star import working. And then the second thing is these imports are going to become like Weasel imports. So the thing that everybody is concerned about is making everyone switch over to Weasel and then still seeing all of this red in their WGSL files or Weasel files or whatever. So the goal is to have things like imports and whatnot working in some way that is reasonable. Because right now, the situation, if you look at my editor right now, it's just red everywhere, right? Which is not fun. And WGSL Analyzer is supporting Weasel, but it doesn't have full support for everything at the moment. So one of the things that people really want before Weasel lands is the ability for imports to both not have these reg squiggles, but also have like the autocomplete and stuff like that. How far that gets before it actually lands is kind of up in the air. But as long as it doesn't error out, I think that's the bar for it being able to be merged. And then after those two things happen, then the next thing that needs to happen is a PR needs to go up for Bevy to port everything to Weasel, which may surface other issues. And if that goes through, then it can be merged. Like that's the Weasel process is those two things, actually getting the PR up, getting it through, getting merged, and fixing any issues that pop up at that time. When that happens is kind of up in the air. I don't know if it'll happen for 0.19. To me, I wouldn't expect it for 0.19. Just because of like the people working on Weasel and Bevy are all volunteers, basically, right? So the people doing the spec stuff for Weasel, the people doing WGSL Analyzer are all individual volunteers doing this after their full-time jobs. So it's really important to not be like, oh yeah, Weasel is going to be in whatever random version. Because you don't want to put pressure on people who are just donating their time. It's not a high priority target then. I would say that it's high priority in the sense that everybody that I can think of off the top of my head thinks that is the direction that rendering needs to go in at the moment. The things I listed are the absolute final blockers, right? So the fact that it has things that I can point to that are like, once this and this get solved, then it can be merged, indicates that it is a thing that got attention. And like, in that sense, I would call it a priority. But if you compare, say, if, for example, CART needs to spend time approving the Weasel PR when it goes up, if the trade-off is will BSN get review time or will Weasel get review time, it is likely that BSN eclipses Weasel, like that kind of thing. Yeah, so like those are two high priority items in a sense, where one probably needs to land. And the other is also like something everybody wants, but also needs to land. I think that a lot of the things that people talk about when they talk about rendering and having a better shader authoring and composability experience at this point seems pretty tied to Weasel to me. In theory, somebody could show up and be like, I'm going to really put a lot of effort into Naga Oil, and I'm going to put a lot of effort into LSP support. And suddenly they pop up and like a whole bunch of stuff is done on the Naga Oil, like non-Weasel front. So far, that has not happened. Patience is a virtue then in this case. I think patience is also always a virtue. I think whenever you talk about a bunch of people who are effectively donating their time to do this work, patience is a virtue. You don't want to like, one of the reasons that I don't talk about things before they land in main, right? In like This Week in Bevy or anything like that, is because there is a certain amount of pressure that puts on people to make things land, right? If, for example, in This Week in Bevy or in a stream or in a video, I was like, this cool new thing is going to land. and it hasn't landed yet, and there's like an issue that actually needs to be resolved in that PR, then that contributor is going to burn out under the pressure that I am then putting on them. And that pressure doesn't need to be there, right? Like I don't need to put that pressure on people. It doesn't help anybody. So in that sense, yes, patience is a virtue. I think that the people who are doing the work to make these things happen are by and large donating their time to make them happen. So being appreciative of those people putting their time into these places, because like I really do want Weasel, right? And that requires like time and effort donation from a whole bunch of people. So like you have to appreciate the time those people are spending. There's no like expectations for them to do anything. On the topic of shaders, is WGPU 28 looking like it'll land for 0.19? Basically, are we finally getting mesh shaders? WGPU 28 already landed. WGPU 28. Pull requests. Closed. Oh, look at the author. I wonder who would know about this PR. WGPU landed last month. It's been a while at this point. So technically speaking, Bevy 0.19 will include mesh shaders. Super Maggie actually is, actually, I don't know if you want me to mention that, so I won't, but there are people around working on mesh shader stuff in WGPU, and that support has landed in WGPU. WGPU 28 has landed in Bevy. There are things that are make it harder to use. Like if you write WGSL right now, you can't really target metal, but you can target Vulkan. There are PRs that are in progress and active to make that happen. I don't know if those will land into WGPU, which then needs to get released, which then also needs to land in Bevy. So to write mesh shaders in Bevy right now, you kind of have to bypass Naga Oil at the moment. You kind of have to do a lot of low-level programming in the sense of like interacting directly with WGPU and not in Bevy's WGPU abstractions and not in Bevy's Naga Oil shader compilation pipeline. So to say it's like supported in Bevy 0.19 is a little bit of an overstatement. I think that the initial support, because of the wonderful work of the people in WGPU who are working on that, it has landed with some support. WGPU 30 will likely overhaul mesh shader design, but most shaders shouldn't be too hard to convert. Sweet. That's good to know. I think that WGPU 30 is far off enough where it's like, I wasn't planning on being like, hey, everybody can use mesh shaders now. Anyway, so let's see, hopefully WGPU 29 makes it for 0.19, which would mean hopefully WGPU 30 makes it for 0.20. So if I was going to guesstimate, I would say Bevy 21 might be the first version where people are really like, okay, you can actually use mesh shaders in a way that is like user friendly. And I say that based on like the time that I know that I'm going to have to like work on that. As far as I know, I'm the only person on the Bevy side of things working on like a mesh shader abstraction. WGPU obviously has people working on it. The WGPU stuff is super important because without the WGPU work, we can't have the Bevy abstractions. So yeah, with the knowledge from Super Maggie in chat, WGPU 30 overhauls mesh shaders. So probably Bevy 0.20, 0.21 would be the like mesh shader release, so to speak. something like that. I'm going to try to get examples merged in earlier than that, but if they merge, I only see them merging in like a experimental mesh shaders like subcategory of the examples. I don't see them being like, everybody should use this anywhere. That said, I need to do my Gaussian blur. Screen, texture, texture. I don't know why we name these things two different things. Like screen texture and texture sampler. Why don't we name these like screen texture and screen sampler or something like that? Anyway, frag coord is, what do we call this in full screen vertex output? This is a vec4, which is interesting. Is that a vec4 because we're actually using vec4? We only use xy here. Gaussian blur, frag coord, xy. I think we only use xy. Texture sample, UV plus UV offset. Frag coord xy over texture dimensions. Really, we need to get the actual... That feels a little bit weird. So this Gaussian blur was... it's used somewhere else in Bevy and got abstracted such that you can import and use it, which is very cool. But it wasn't like designed to be used in like a post process and necessarily. Like the API here clearly expects a certain signature. Let's see, I think we only use XY, which would mean that this frag coord is like the width, height, screen space pixel coordinate. So they're saying that this is supposed to be in dot position. I don't know that that's necessarily true in this scenario. We're just going to say COC 0.1. Frag offset, I think, is going to be like 0, 0. Maybe a little bit more, 1, 1. Output. You know what's super interesting, actually, is that is flickering. And I think that's flickering because of an ordering issue and not because of that material. So I want to test that. I think that's what's happening. I think the post process and the rest of the stuff is kind of like fighting. Post process, inset, post process. What else do we have in post process? I feel like this needs to be like before, after something. Because this was happening for the actual chromatic aberration effect too. Does it happen on main? Let's go check main, actually. Let's pull. I know there's a couple of rendering issues that are going in on main right now. So I'm not too concerned about it, but minus Ergo run example custom post processing. Is that what we call it? Custom post processing. Let's run this, see if we see the same flickering. If we do, then it is an issue with the setup on main, which is interesting in and of itself, because that turns into then a PR for this example. Do you need to upgrade my computer? I'm starting to feel the age of the M1, both in the graphics feature support sense and also the, like, it's just like a 5 or 6 year old computer at this point. It was fast when I bought it. What's being overhauled about the mesh shader design? That's the internals that you're talking about, right? Also, if there's like a discussion on GitHub or something, feel free to just be like, the discussion's on GitHub. You can read it, Chris. Yeah, you've got an M1 MacBook Pro mostly just for having something to test Apple Silicon Target stuff. Yeah. Every day I get a little bit closer to wanting to run Linux, I think. Okay, so this does not look flickery. So is it not flickery? Or is there just nothing else in the scene? Let's try to custom post-processing spawn. Let's make this something like behind it and to the side, maybe. I don't know. Just trying to get a second object in here. There's no GitHub discussion, but you're talking with some web GPU spec folks. Ooh. Because mesh shaders don't have any spec support currently, right? Oh, you know what I did? You know what's really silly? I wasn't paying attention, and what I did was... It's what I call streamer brain. Yeah, just to be clear, it won't be added to spec anytime soon. I do want their opinions of how to articulate the validation rules. Yes. Yeah. That's sort of what I expected. It doesn't seem like the issue on the web GPU spec repo has had any activity in a while. So I kind of wouldn't expect it to... With the state that I think it's in, I wouldn't expect it to just randomly pick up. The summers here in Australia have expanded the gasket around the screen so much now, getting long in the tooth. You daily drive an Arch system. It's definitely a nicer environment for development. Lots of setup to get there, though. I think there's I can't remember the name of it. It's not like Clarity OS. It's like C something that people were suggesting. That is an Arch-based distro. Arch OS. Starting with C. If I can type, that would help a lot. Cache. Cache is Cache OS. The spec team is putting off basically everything into probably early 2027 to work on bindless. Yeah, that's totally respectable, totally understandable. I'm definitely okay with that. I don't think I really plan on shipping on web. I think that mesh shaders are super cool. I would love to have web support for them, but I think that most of the web support that I feel like exists currently, especially in Bevy, is more oriented towards game jams and demos. And mesh shaders have the opportunity to make some things and patterns nicer. But if I was focusing on getting it out to as many people as possible on, say, itch, I would probably skip whatever I was going to do with mesh shaders and have a different implementation. Like if I was going to do a bunch of particle effects or something like that, or if I was going to like start rendering everything with meshlets, I would probably have a stripped down version of it that I was shipping on itch and then do a different implementation once I proved that the idea worked. That's a optimized distro that compile their packages for modern CPU feature sets like AVX. Nice. I don't really know anything about Cache. I just have had it recommended, I think, a couple of times at this point. Honestly, you feel like a conditional branch on web native that just disables the features that rely on the mesh shaders when on web is probably the way I'd go about it. I think it's more than that. If you're talking about mesh shaders, it's more than that. Like Super Maggie is about to say, mesh shaders are super platform dependent. Like AMD GPUs and NVIDIA GPUs seem to have completely different expectations for like the amount of task shaders versus the amount of mesh shaders, etc. They're saying you basically need to optimize separately for each GPU architecture you want to target, plus an extra vertex shader implementation for compatibility. Yeah. So if you were going to do everything and you wanted compatibility, you would have to do that backup anyway, which matches with what my expectation is. That's how I thought it worked. So it's nice to hear that reflected. The thing that I would do if I was going to ship mesh shaders is use it to make things easier for myself. So I would probably not do the compatibility layer as an individual developer. Right. Like if I'm gonna do a game that is like a mesh shader using game, then I'm going to build a game that is mesh shader using and just say, if you don't have mesh shaders, I'm sorry you can't run this. Because doing the backup, like if I do the backup as a individual or a low team count developer, then why am I doing the mesh shaders? Right? If I have the backup, why am I doing the mesh shaders? Or I could just turn off certain features, right? Like if you ran on a certain platform and I was using mesh shaders for particle systems, just turning off the particles entirely, something like that, something super simple. Yeah, honestly, for a Linux distro, you probably wouldn't recommend your Arch distro. Fedora is probably the sweet spot between you just want it to work and you want bleeding edge. Unless you want I want to tinker with it till it's exactly what I want, then Arch is great. I think my last Arch was Manjaro. Which I didn't really have a problem with. I kind of liked Manjaro. But I think my next one is going to be Cache. What's funny is I already wrote this Gaussian blur code in the PR that added it. There's the PR. I wonder if I posted it. I probably didn't. Perfect. You know what I should have done? I should have posted the code that I used there, and then I would be able to reuse the code that I used. Oh yeah, if you liked Manjaro, you'll like Kashi. Cool. Okay, so the question here is Bevy Jam's implementation of a custom post process is very flashy, which is most noticeable in the material or the exit condition. The test that I should do here probably is I think I just reused the energy well component. So energy well material. This adds a new energy well material. So if I just remove this, then the energy well will at least not run. And I can see if it's something related to the fact that I'm outputting like HDR level values there. Because those are way higher than 1 is really what they are. It's still flashing. It's less noticeable. But it's definitely still flashing, which is interesting. I wonder if I can't see it here because this is clear color white. And I just I can't see it on a white background. Let's do clear color black. It's also possible there was something that made it in between the version that I'm using and the current version. Or, you know what I just thought of? It could be atmosphere. Now that I think about it, it's probably atmosphere. Let's run the atmosphere demo. So atmosphere in post-processing. Then to validate that, I should be able to find the systems that run the atmosphere. Because I don't think this is flashing. Dark screen, sunrise, sunrise, sunrise. I don't think that's flashing. UARI Fedora is nice. You swapped to Linux about 6 months ago, and it seems to hit a sweet spot of not getting in the way for dev stuff like Ubuntu did, but it's still quite stable. Nice. It's got to be a scheduling issue of some kind. And my narrowing down here is basically testing the custom post-processing example in isolation, maybe taking a guess or two there, testing the atmosphere in isolation. And then my next, that, to me, that's narrowed it down that both of these things alone work fine. The project that we have uses them both together. And I think offhand, I don't actually know when the atmosphere code runs. So let's spell atmosphere correctly one day. Bevy light atmosphere. I think this is just the lighting setup. So this won't have the systems, I don't think. This is just like scattering, fall off, etc. PBR source mod. Bind groups. Here's the node. Has anyone tried Omarchi? That's the DHH distro, right? I have no interest in that. And chat says it does things poorly, so. Let's see, dispatch work groups. What am I looking for here? Atmosphere LUTs. Atmosphere LUTs are added somewhere else. Core 3D. LUTs are done in Core 3D after the pre-pass, before the main pass. And the render sky is after the opaque pass and before the transparent pass. It's weird that that would cause issues then. Right, because let's re-enable our energy well here. Because the post-process then is in post-process. Let's say after Core 3D Systems main pass and before Bigor, can't type today. Core 3D Systems post-process. I don't really intend for this to be like where we run this, but it will confirm kind of like if there's an ordering constraint where it's getting thrown into post-process against something else and happening in a different spot, this will confirm that for us, which it did. That is what's happening. So there's something happening in post-process that we need to order against. Interesting. Cargo run. It's also interesting that it doesn't happen in the actual example in the Bevy repo. So it's something we're doing here that causes this flashing. Post-process. Let's do a search for Core 3D Systems post-process. And the other thing that I should probably check is we aren't really doing anything here. Let's do the Gaussian blur return. So the post-process still applies. My guess actually is that sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. So volumetric fog before post-process. Post-process, auto exposure before tone mapping. Do we want to do this before or after exposure? Tone mapping, upscaling, render debug overlay, XA. XA is after tone mapping, bloom is before it. Bloom is one of the things that's flickering. So I'm doing experiments now because for me, it's not just about fixing the problem. which if I was just fixing the problem and needed to move on, this would work. The thing that I am interested in is getting a little bit better of an understanding of exactly where it needs to be. So is this not something that I can do here in set before? Not a value. Do I not have access to this? Is that create only? Interesting, interesting. The thought plickens. Where is auto exposure? Let's go searching for auto exposure. We already brought it in for an import, so it's I could have just looked at the import. Oh, was that it's got an underscore, that's why. So auto exposure is not public. I wonder if that's intentional. This is something I think I'll ask Charlotte later. Let's see. Do I have a place to write this down? Should auto exposure, etc., be public, or are those supposed to be internal details? And the ordering is supposed to be pre-post. I feel like Core 3D Systems is too coarse for this. I feel like the answer is that these are either supposed to be public or there is supposed to be a different way to handle that. Bloom is public, which is interesting. So Bloom being public and auto exposure not makes me feel like that's just an oversight so that we can make a PR and publicize like auto exposure or something. Yeah, if we do before Bloom, then everything's fine. I didn't need to cancel that run. So if we do a return here, I intended to show off Gaussian blur, but instead we're showing off how to debug and analyze render systems. Do Arch with Hyperland, and it's all the same without DHH. Yeah, cool. You're still on Pop OS 22. I guess Pop OS is a Ubuntu derivative then? I don't actually know offhand. Setting it up yourself means that when it inevitably breaks from a system upgrade, you know how to fix it. Yeah, I think that there's definitely benefits to running Linux in a way that forces you to really understand the system. I think that if I'm using it for production purposes, I need a different level of stability. Right? I think that I would have a lot of fun just fixing and tinkering with a Linux. Unquestionably, a lot of fun doing that. But does Stream want to watch me tinker with Linux? When I give a talk at a conference, do I want to be tinkering with Linux before my slides go up? Like those kinds of questions are different stability concerns. You believe in the view node example was placed after the tone mapping node and before the end main post-processing node. Really? You think that this was an accidental change in the PR? Full screen material. Let's go check. We can check that. There's only been one PR change to this example, so it's actually really easy for us to go check. Let's do a git blame, which I wish was named anything else. Do I have enough desktops? Never. Okay, let's, prior to that commit, we will unblame this on the left. So left is current. Right is code as of the view node. Yeah, it was. So render graph edges between tone mapping and end main post processing. So I think this is a fix. I think this is supposed to be after tone mapping then. I don't know that our effect is supposed to be specifically. We really don't have an effect that we have implemented yet. We just have the scaffolded code. So is this also fine if we do after tone mapping? Then why not go for Nix-based distro maximum tinkering? While I do use Linux for my deployed services and Docker, etc., this doesn't work with after tone mapping. Interesting. What else is there? That's it. This can't run after tone mapping anymore for some reason. There's another system that it needs to be oriented against. Unless end main is something, which I don't think exists anymore. Schedule label for core 3D. Post process. It's a little bit harder to discover. I don't know that it was ever really easy to discover per se. But this is definitely like something that I want Bevy mod debug dump for. Loki, you might be the target audience for Nix. Would it surprise you to know that I looked at Nix like 8 years ago? It's all declarative. You have this big config file with all your software versions and stuff in it, like Docker for your OS. Like Docker for your OS. That's such a painful description. I totally understand where you're coming from when you say it's like Docker for your OS. But those are just such different things. That's really funny though. So interesting that this runs after tone mapping and flashes. Also interesting that it only happens in my jam application, seemingly not in the example. So what am I doing specifically to cause this? I think it has to be the atmosphere, right? So the question then is it easier to bring in the atmosphere example into the custom post-processing example to check, or the custom post-processing example into the atmosphere example. Probably post-processing into atmosphere. So I think that's what I'm going to do. This is just going to get super, super ugly, but that's totally fine. We're just going to drop all this right at the end. I'm going to make like a multi-slash comment here to identify it. Post-processing setting needs to go on camera, whatever camera we have here. I guess we're using free camera, which is another variable. And then we can't have camera 3D. We can't have two camera 3Ds. So just making sure I didn't copy in the setup function. Terrain, camera fog. Okay. I think I correctly avoided what I needed to avoid here. Okay, and then we need to add the post-process plugin to the plugin set. Right? And then we cargo run the atmosphere example. You're cursed with describing stuff. I think what it is for me is like I spent a couple years working at Docker. Oh man, that's like 10 years ago at this point. So long ago. Why can't you infer that type? Settings, binding. Oh, because I didn't bring any of the, gonna grab all of this. Dump that up here, I guess. I thought I did this already. It looks like I did. I did not. Let's see if Rust Analyzer will help us. If not, we're going to have a bunch of duplicates, I think. Is there a cleanup system in post-process maybe? A cleanup system for what? Can't think of off the top of my head what would be getting cleaned up there. Rust Analyzer, what are you doing? Let's see, as bind group, shader type. Instead of letting Rust Analyzer do this, we're just going to run it. There's our flash. Texture format, view. Let's just comment this out and do format, view target, texture format HDR. Run the atmosphere example. And then we wait for cargo to block the target directory and grab it from Rust Analyzer. I don't know what cleanup system would be there. There it is. So the way the atmosphere example is set up and the way the post-process example is set up gives us 3 moons. No, I don't, let's make this smaller. So the question then Let me record this while I have it up, actually. Sorry, this is going to flash for a little bit longer. You think it would fit the Incohesive Fever Dream theme? Yeah, I wish I had a better thought for the Incohesive Fever Dream theme. I never really came up with anything that I felt like fit. And that might just be like a me thing, but you know, I feel like I don't want to build incohesive games, I guess. And that really got stuck in my head. Like I want to build games that are cohesive, that work together, that can like do a thing and people can have fun with, not something that is like I can't figure out how to play it. And I think I really got stuck on that. That explains why the texture format mismatch flashes too instead of just being a solid color. What explains it? I don't remember what I changed. Because they're two different color targets? I think that's why, right? No, actually, there'll be the same image piped into both, if I think. Unless there's a type argument somewhere that is fetching the right one. Okay, so we have our reproduction. This went from Gaussian blur demo to rendering debugging. The render app. Okay, so post-process system inset, post-process before Bloom, we know works, right? Does not work in the atmosphere example. Before core 3D systems, well, post-process, right? If I can spell systems correctly. After core 3D systems main pass, right? This is our hallmark, our like blunt hammer, if you will. Do this between the two passes such that basically everything in Bevy is either before or after it. That's what I'm doing. Which is feels like a very blunt hammer. Yep. So I'm not as sure exactly which system is running before after the other, or it's cool to have that trinary star system. But there's definitely something here, and I think that is a thing for later to figure out. Oh no, because both times it flashed was when you had atmosphere in. The Jam game used HDR, and Atmosphere also requires HDR. So the reason the texture format was flashing was because of the mismatch, I believe. So in one pass, we were treating it as HDR, and in the other pass, we were trying to treat it as SDR. Now, the ordering was still an issue. So that wouldn't have affected the flashing even if it were both HDR, or all three of those were HDR. I think it would still be flashing because the flashing isn't related to the texture format. Cool. Okay. So I think that's a future Bevy mod debug dump. Take a look at what the ordering is like here. Situation. It's also very interesting because I wonder what end users are supposed to do. If you're going to write a post-processing, so like before bloom works here, but why does before bloom work here? Unknown, right? Bloom is on the early end of the post process, so it's a little bit more like the blunt hammer we were using. But yeah, this is the kind of thing that I'm using 0.19 for, actually. Like running into this so that I've seen it, so that if somebody runs into it 3 months from now when they're trying to do this, then I know the answer to what is going on. This is the process for how I know things when people ask in Discord. It's having run into it and figured it out before. Because we could have just done this and moved on with our day. Cool. Let me make sure I'm using Gaussian blur appropriately. I don't think I am. I don't know what these values are by default. So let's get rid of all this. Well, not all of this. COC is the diameter, not the radius, of the circle of confusion for the fragment. Frag coord is the screen space pixel coordinate, which, I mean, I guess I understand. But screen space pixel coordinate would be XY with no Z, right? I guess technically speaking, if you have depth, there would be a Z. But I don't think we use it in the Gaussian blur. I think the frag offset is the like directional. So this is a single pass or a single direction Gaussian blur, separable Gaussian blur, which means that if you want the full blur for both axes, you would have to pass in an offset for both directions. So what I'm really expecting here is to have an X blur, but that is not really what I'm getting. There we go. There's our blur. So this is a single pass again. And this is because multiplication is not what we're supposed to be doing here. Let's bring this down to like 2. $22 is not what I want. So there is a blur here, but it's very subtle now. Are you able to set the order before or after the atmosphere custom post processes? Yeah, it's only used once to determine the UV. Yeah. Yeah, which we have the UV. But I guess, you know, Gaussian blur on an arbitrary image might not. So I guess passing in the pixels makes sense. I am, yeah. So we just get the texture dimensions because they're freely available. We don't necessarily have UVs, so it makes sense to pass in the texture dimension number. Yeah, I think that all makes sense. So we've got an X blur and a Y blur. But it's very low level. It's not like a it's not like just blur it and then it'll give you a magically nice smooth Gaussian blur. If you want multiple iterations of the blur, you have to do multiple iterations of the Gaussian blur. What's the difference between adding up 2 blurs instead of doing one on both axes? The implementation here, as far as I know, because I didn't write the implementation, I'm just using it here. The implementation is what I believe is a separable Gaussian blur, which means that you can basically, if you have a kernel, which is like, let's say a 3x3 grid of pixels surrounding the pixel that you care about, you can then do the x-axis and the y-axis separately, and you can do them in parallel, and you can do them for a little bit less cost if you do it that way. And if you do them like that, then they add together to or they don't necessarily add. I think add is the wrong thing. I think I'm doing the wrong operation on the actual value here. But this results in what is effectively like both directions blurred, but in a way that you can combine them. I don't think. Oh, maybe it does. Maybe I was wrong. I thought it was single directional. I don't think it is. So we actually don't need to do that, and I'm wrong. That is still a valid thing to do with a kernel, to make it a separable algorithm instead of a single directional one. But I was wrong, and we don't need to do that here. Wouldn't that just be a diagonal direction? I don't think so. Performs a single direction. Yes. Okay, so I think I was right. Sorry. Performs a single direction of the separable Gaussian blur kernel. This is definitely separable. It's definitely one direction. If I knew a One Direction song, I would sing one. So to get both and to combine them in the right way, you do have to actually do both directions separately. Right, because you can see the difference here if I make this really intense, hopefully. I don't know if this is big enough on your screen, but you can see the difference here of all the locations that the edges are going into. Maybe if I make this even bigger, we can see it even more. Right? It's, I kind of go cross-eyed looking at it personally, but you can see how the edges are going. One goes down, one goes left, one goes up, one goes right. So what you're effectively doing is combining the two different axes that were done individually. So if you do them like this, and we don't use the second output, you see how we end up with one diagonal direction, right? Easiest to see on the white emissive squares, yeah. Much harder to see it on the thing that I colored the same as the clear color in the background, definitely. And if we change this again to do just horizontal, you can see it moving in a horizontal direction instead of a diagonal direction. This is fairly common for algorithms that are applications of like a kernel processing, right? Where you end up with a 3x3. It doesn't have to be 3x3. I'm just like 3x3 is just really easy to visualize because you have one in the middle and all of the stuff on the outside. And if you do the samples for like left and right and top and bottom, and you combine them, you basically get the full Gaussian blur. Versus doing like all 8 samples and trying to combine them. Now, I don't think adding these together is the right thing to do. I'm trying to think of, because the output here is going to be a color. So you can use as many passes as you want. Yes. The more passes, the more samples. The more samples, the higher cost, and you get to choose how much of that you want to pay. Right? So if we do 40, 40, 20, 20, and I'm just going to keep adding these together, even though for some reason my streamer brain is not calculating correctly. Then you can see this blur is getting a little bit more. Like we have these at very extreme values. It's worth noting. So you would need a lot more passes to get 40 to look good. I'm using 40 and 20 because it shows where those actual samples are going. Yeah, that's why I'm saying addition is, I think, the wrong thing to do here. But I don't think multiplication is right either because it darkens. And I can't remember how you're supposed to combine these with all the other things that are currently going on in my head. So let's see how Bevy does it. Depth of field is where this is used. Calculates the circle of confusion. See, horizontal and vertical. So it doesn't even use them in the same pass. Here's box blur instead of Gaussian. Probably also useful to separate out. So what is this? This is depth of field. And this would be Gaussian horizontal and Gaussian vertical, which I assume are being used in separate passes. I think that actually gets inferred now as of 28, doesn't it? That's less exciting. Where's the depth of field node? Doff mod render app depth of field bind group pipeline, hopefully somewhere in here. Horizontal vertical pipeline prepare. Here's our, no, that's still prepare. Here's our pipelines. There's horizontal pipeline and vertical pipeline, right? There's two different pipelines here, which is clear. So that's really how this is intended to be used in general. There's the take one and then blur the output of the other is, I believe, how this is intended to be used. At which point, because you've blurred vertically and blurred horizontally, then you're getting the vertical blur, which you are then taking that effectively 3 stack that has been blurred and blurring it horizontally, which gives you that full thing. I don't think, because this takes a screen texture, I don't think that's possible. I think the thing that happens here is basically, because this is separable, because what you're effectively doing is sampling top and bottom, right? And then blurring in the vertical direction. And then as you do the horizontal, you have effectively already sampled the vertical. And thus, for the 3x3 that you kernel that you care about, you've already you've already blurred vertically. So the vertical pixels are already combined into what they should be. And then the horizontal pixels pull those out across, and you end up getting your 3x3 pass. Which in this case that we're showing is like a 40x40 and a 20x20, right? I think for extremely small values, this probably doesn't matter as much. But the intent of this helper function is that it is done in multiple passes, not that it is used twice in the same shader. Okay, depth of field, I think this is it. Get pipeline, post process, view bind group, uniforms, depth, texture, source. First input attachment. First render attachment. Begin render pass, set the pipeline, set the bind group, draw the full screen pass. How are we determining, let's see, we have the two pipelines. How are we determining which one we're running here? I think this gets called twice. uniform, target, depth, texture, pipelines. We can either be in Gaussian blur or bokeh here. Both are similar, consisting of 2 passes each. Yes. I don't see the pass. Oh, for pipeline render info in pipelines render info iter. I think that's where this is coming from. And this is a function that is defined here, which defines the 2 pipelines. So this is defining the pipeline passes as an array or an iterator, whatever you want to call it. And then in that function where we execute the actual passes, it's iterating over this, doing one, writing that out, doing the second one. So if you wanted to do more, this is basically what you would do. And then you could run it multiple times if you wanted to. It's going to be, could you take the output of one Gaussian and use it as the input of the other to do both passes in one pass? To do both passes in one pass. I'm trying to retcon what you said into I don't think the answer is yes. I think if you wanted to do this in a way that ran it in one shader, which is what I think you're asking, like one shader execution, you would have to have I don't think you can read from the thing you just wrote to though. I think you have to do it as 2. I guess technically if you did it in a compute shader, you could do like one shader pass and then a barrier and then another shader pass. I think with some contortion, you could get this to execute in a single quote unquote shader. It is one render pass, I guess. Because we don't start the tracked render pass until later, right? Yeah. Post process write, create bind group, render pass attachment, and then we start the render pass inside of the loop. So in this case, we're doing 2 render passes here. Setting the pipeline, executing, setting the pipeline, executing. This is obviously not like happening sequentially in the order of the CPU code. That's not the right way to say that. This is queuing this to happen. It's not happening here in the same way that commands are deferred. Yes, Gaussian blur needs access to the neighboring pixels, but it only outputs the value for the current pixel. Yes. But if you do that across the entire image, then you end up with the vertical blur being written out and then the horizontal blur being written out. So realistically, this would be multipass. Multipass? So I wanted to show this, but realistically, this is not the right thing to do, so I shouldn't encode it into this example. So this would only be like this, and then we would have to have another pass to do the Gaussian blur in the other direction, which I think is what I'm going to do. I do kind of want a Gaussian blur effect behind the main menu. So I think I am going to do a couple of passes when you bring up like the pause menu or something, but we'll see. Oh, that was in response to tea time. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think that's going to be it for the stream for today. Got into a bunch of rendering stuff today, which is cool. And I'll probably be working on this project for the next couple streams at least. Why don't I use depth of field instead? I could. I have an orthographic camera in this example, so there really isn't depth. And I don't believe that depth of field will work on the orthographic camera. So if I wanted to use depth of field, I believe in the current implementation, I would have to use a perspective camera and not the orthographic. And I kind of want to use the orthographic camera in this demo. So I could either PR support for depth of field working on orthographic cameras, or I could use the Gaussian blur. Those are my options. They're both very valid options. I think that doing a PR could be super useful. I don't know how many people are actually using orthographic cameras in 3D and also want depth of field. You know, you forgot the shader output's a single pixel. Yeah. Well, the fragment shader does, but yeah. But that's going to be it for today. Thanks everyone for hanging out. Like I said, we're probably going to be working on this project for a couple more streams, at least. I think that the bones of what we have here, if I don't, let's get rid of my Gaussian blur. Can we do, whatever, doesn't matter. I think the bones of like the spawning mechanics and stuff are good. I like some of the effects that are going on here. The things that I really don't like are related to the character, which I rushed, the animation, which I rushed. The hammer effect here is something I don't like. But I think the general concept of like the enemies coming around and being able to fire at you like this, I need to change that to not have a Z-axis on that laser. Especially the spawning here, I'm very happy with. And I think expanding this into a bunch of different enemies and a bunch of different like levels and things like that could be very fun. So we're going to keep working on that. These gems are probably going to become like protection zones for the enemies, and we'll do some more detection around that, some more nav mesh stuff, etc. So have a great rest of your day, y'all, and I will see you probably next weekend.